So we would like to thank IPOPHL, the EU, through the IPOPHL for inviting IPOPHL and giving us this opportunity to share our experience and learnings in developing a Sui Generis GI system in the Philippines as a means of support to rural development. So this is the scope of my presentation. I will just give a brief introduction about GIs and the mandate of the office, and then let's journey together to along the road of the Philippines GI road to Sui Generis system, and then with emphasis on the national interest, balancing different interests of different stakeholders in this GI system. And then before I end my presentation, I will just give share some of the experiences of our local producers as far as the impact to them on this GI system. And then I will conclude my presentation. So GI is considered as a different category or form of intellectual property right, well, along with copyright, trademarks, patents, and industrial design. So it is a class, a different class of its own, geographical indications under our IP code. And then it is the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines that is mandated to examine and register geographical indications in the country. And in particular, it is the Bureau of Trademarks that is authorized to conduct search, examine, and register applications for the registration of geographical indications in the Philippines. Now, the start of the journey, initially the IPOPHL introduced the concepts of GIs to several local producers and artisans. So this was way back in the early 2000s. So we started with the mango producers to be more precise. And then we encouraged them because the existing system was and still is collective mark registration. So out of these consultations, basic orientation seminars with several local producers of agricultural products and foodstuffs, we were able to encourage some producers to register their collective marks, and among which are those marks you can see here in this slide. Now, the IP code provides sufficient mandate to establish a sui generis system. Although, as I mentioned, we started with a collective mark system, which is available in the Philippines. This mandate given to the Intellectual Property Office and the Director General in particular to promulgate rules and regulations, given the mandate that I mentioned earlier, should be enough for the office to devise a system, a sui generis system of registering GIs. And this opinion, this observation was also strengthened by the feasibility study conducted under the auspices of the IPOPHL. So of course, through the European Union, and I will go through that in a bit. Now, going back to the highway. So, and then we mapped out, IPOPHL, the office, mapped out several potential GI products throughout the country, although the main thrust really was to protect them under the collective mark system. So in the map, you can see from north of the Philippines, the Cordillera heirloom rice, Kalinga coffee, the Gupan bangus. It's a species of milk of fish, and then the Bicol pili nuts, and then in the Visayas region, you have the Aklan piña fiber. It's made of pineapple fiber, the cloth, and then we have the Tibiao piña fiber as well, and then the Bohol ube kinampay, Guimaras mangoes, and down in Mindanao, we have the Davao pomelo, the Davao cacao. Most recently, we visited this area, and then Lake Cebu, Tinalac, among others. So more or less, we have already identified around 30 potential GI products in the country. Now, so IPOPHL continued to conduct stakeholders consultation and basic orientation seminars regarding collective mark and GI registration concepts throughout the country, specifically targeting rural communities, the farmers, the producers, the traders in those regions. And then in 2012, in February 2012, we conducted the office, the National GI Forum, bringing together at that time 8 potential GI producers or stakeholders. And this was an opportunity also for us to conduct consultations with these stakeholders together with relevant government agencies, namely the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Science and Technology, the National Economic and Development Authority, among others. And then we continued the developmental efforts in identifying as well as capacitating potential GI stakeholders. So you will see there photos of our activities in different regions of the country. And it's not only about building the capacity of our stakeholders, we also continued building the capacity of IPOPHL, particularly our trademark examiners, through trainings and workshops conducted by partners like, of course, the EU IPO, like what we are doing right now, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the INAO, or the GI, it's the GI Office of France, and then the US Patent and Trademark Office, and different ASEAN member states as we went along the process. Again, you have their photos taken with different partner institutions and partner offices. And as I mentioned earlier, it was through the EU under the IPKC project that we had this feasibility study on the establishment or the development of a sui generis system, GI sui generis system in the Philippines. And that feasibility study only affirmed our position that indeed under the current IP code, we can establish a sui generis system of GI registration. So then we started drafting the GI regulations. We have a GI team, and they are also present today in this webinar, all the members of our GI team in the office. So we started drafting the GI regulations based on the learnings from the different systems of not only the ASEAN member states, but the European system, the US system, Australia, etc. But of course, we customized the system in order to align or prioritize the national interests. And these, we did not stop here because we also identified the gaps in the current IP code. So whatever those gaps are, we drafted simultaneously a proposed GI legislation together with the GI regulations. So the national interest as emphasis of our GI regulations and the proposed GI legislation. We know the strength of our country as well as most of the ASEAN member states, if not all, that we need to extend protection not only to wines and spirits, especially protected under the TRIPS agreement, but as well as to handicrafts and natural products such as weaves, handicrafts, minerals, among others. After all, we recognize that GI is a tool for rural development and preservation of indigenous and cultural tradition, products, as well as, of course, practices. That is why you will see in our GI regulations special recognition and incentives to indigenous peoples, regardless of nationalities, of course, because of the national treatment. And yeah, the special provision and possible waiver of fees if the applicant is a group or producers association belonging to an indigenous community. Now, we understand that there are different interests, varying interests in a GI system. So that is why we need to balance the interests of these dialogue partners, maintaining due process. So there has to be remedies for third party, for opposition, or in our regulation, a third party observation, and the remedy of revocation, which is the equivalent for us of cancellation in case a party may be damaged by the GI registration. There has to be transparency in that rights to GIs must be acquired only through examination and registration with publication for the rest of the world to see. Then the generic and customary terms, the registrability or of course non-registrability of generic or customary term. But of course, what is generic or customary must depend on the understanding of the relevant or general consumers in the Philippines, as the case may be. Coexistence, marks that are earlier registered in good faith can coexist with GIs. Now, as to the impact to our stakeholders, based on our consultations with our stakeholders, we gathered that in the case of Guimaras mango producers, there has been an increase in the farm gate prices of their Guimaras mangoes, which of course benefited the farmers, in particular, the producers of mangoes in this specific region. So that's more than 100% increase from 92 pesos per kilo in 2018 to around 200 pesos per kilo in 2022. And the opportunity to export these mangoes outside the Philippines, in Switzerland, as I've learned recently, and other countries. Now, this opportunity promises to bring seeds of development to the province of Guimaras. So they have this Mangahan Festival. It's an annual festival to celebrate the harvest of mangoes in their province. And then international market reach, in particular, some countries in Europe. And then in the case of Bicol region, we have the Bicol Pili. So as far as this industry is concerned, they realize that the more than 280 member distributors of this association, the Orgullo Can Bicol Association, will benefit from this protection, from this system. Well, right now, they are enjoying the benefit of collective mark registration. Thankfully, we have the WIPO to assist us in this initiative. So the Bicol Pili is composed of producers of different products, not only food items, but also decorations, fashion accessories, furniture, including cosmetics and oil. So this, again, is a catalyst for economic recovery in the Bicol region, especially in this time of pandemic. So recovering from the pandemic. And then lastly, I can cite as an example, the experience of the Tinalak Tao Cebu stakeholders. So this is a group of indigenous peoples, people belonging from the Tiboli community. So they realized that there has been an improvement in the economic well-being of the members of their community. So specifically, they cited that they can now afford to provide computers for their children in their online learning. And then they were able to buy, means of transportation like motorcycles. The women weavers were likewise empowered to become financially independent. And there has been a revival of traditional processes and rituals in producing the Tinalak cloth. You can see there our Miss Universe wearing a long skirt made up of the Tinalak cloth. So in conclusion, the development of a GI Sui Generis system is a collective effort and indeed requires a holistic approach. It needs collaboration and partnerships between and among private and public sectors, local and foreign. It needs the participation of stakeholders to really make it inclusive. So with this, I end my presentation. Thank you very much once again for listening.